Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 2 of week 6, and the topic of today's lecture is the feminist critique of traditional epistemologies. So, before we begin to understand what are the feminist critique of traditional epistemology, we must first understand what is feminist epistemology, what are the important critiques of traditional epistemology, deconstructing the dislocated objectivity and rationality, and need for reconstruction based on feminist perspective. So, a lot will be covered in today's lecture. So, let us first begin with feminist epistemology. Now, what we mean by epistemology? First of all, we must know what is epistemology. It's a branch of philosophy concerned with understanding how knowledge is acquired, justified and evaluated. It is very important because knowledge is created in a certain manner, and if we know that who are the persons who are responsible for creation of knowledge, what is the process of knowledge creation, what are the methods being adopted to acquire knowledge, and who is going to benefit from the knowledge. If we try to find out answers to these questions, then we can understand that how knowledge is created. So, how knowledge is acquired, justified and evaluated, everything comes under the heading of epistemology or study of knowledge. When we are talking about the feminist critique of the traditional epistemology, we have to understand the process of othering. It is the systematic marginalization of female by relegating them to a hierarchical inferiority. So, in the entire process of knowledge system, we find that there is a phenomena of othering where the female are marginalized, and in a hierarchy of system they are considered inferior. And knowledge makers have partook in systematically embedding this process in the creation of a naturalized male reality. So, you see that multiple processes have taken place in the creation of knowledge. The first is that women have been considered inferior in the process of knowledge creation or as the possessor of knowledge, and second, the knowledge which is produced by the male, and secondly, it is being projected as natural, objective and neutral in nature, though it does not take into consideration the role of woman or the knowledge which may be contributed by women or role of women in the knowledge production. An important part of which is inculcation of this process in the production of knowledge, which I have already mentioned, that if you see the general social structure, there is a position of inferiority which has been accorded to women since so many years. Woman has been subjected to inferior status in the private sphere and also in the public sphere, and have been victimized in a number of spheres of life. They have suffered violation of rights, and they had to wage various movements to gain civil and political rights, then social economic rights, then certain rights which are specific to women needs, and so on. So, the journey has not been very easy. So, therefore, this social perpetuation of inferiority has been manifested in the production of knowledge also, where we find that women have been sidelined when the process of knowledge production or researches are taking place. We find that the women researchers are less in number. The standpoint of women or women issues are not researched to the extent to which the issues which concerns men are researched. The feminist epistemological theory is concerned with the disparity between women's experience and how human experiences are claimed to be total representation in the traditional theories of knowledge. So, what is considered as human experience in the traditional theories of knowledge are not actually, it includes the experiences of women, because women's experiences are different in comparison to men's experiences. But in the name of human experiences, we find that only men's perspective or men's position are taken into account rather than the woman's experiences and position. So, therefore, This disparity is the prime concern of the feminist epistemological theory, and this is the prime critique of the traditional epistemology. Feminist epistemology and feminist philosophy of science have studied the ways in which gender influences our conceptions of knowledge, the knowing subject, and the practices of inquiry and justification. Now, these are various areas of knowledge. First of all, how we conceive knowledge, then who is the knower, the knowing subject, then what are the practices of inquiry, what are the methods of acquisition of knowledge, and also the process of justification. Everything is having a gender influence, and that gender influence has to be taken into consideration when we are talking about building a feminist epistemology or when we are making a critique of the traditional epistemology. The objective is also to explain how gender and feminist values and perspective have played a causal role in promoting theories that aid egalitarian and liberation movements. Now, we have to understand that feminism is not simply an ideology, but it is more of a movement, and most of the perspectives, most of the values, they have not only inspired and motivated various movements, but various movements have in turn generated various perspectives which have contributed to women's studies. So, therefore, we have to recognize the importance of those values, precepts, practices, constructs, perspectives in not only promoting theories, but also that have aided various movements. It is to be recognized that these developments are not merely social, but they are also cognitive. That means they have contributed to knowledge. They have contributed to knowledge about the reasons behind the injustices perpetuated against women. They have contributed to knowledge about why certain conditions have been so exploitative and what are the reasons behind their perpetuation, and how those conditions can be eradicated, how the conditions of women can be bettered. These are some of the cognitive issues, also not just social issues. Now, some of the dominant knowledge practices which have excluded women or which have disadvantaged women, they constitute the critique of traditional epistemology. Traditionally, the way in which we have studied politics, we have studied economics, biology, or for that matter any subject, through certain theories and certain concepts, they have systematically excluded women, or they have proven to be a type of a disadvantage to the women in certain ways. First of all, the most important exclusion is they have been excluded from the inquiry. So, when we are raising certain questions, when we are doing certain research, when we are formulating research statements, we are excluding them as if they are non-existent, or we are not so much concerned about inquiring about the feminist issues and more about other issues which concern the men's world. Then denying them epistemic authority, that they also may be knower of knowledge, they can also produce knowledge. This authority has been denied to them for a large period of time. And one of the important reasons behind was the absence of women in the public sphere for a very considerable segment of time. It is only in the recent years that we find the women are visible to such a great extent in the public sphere. We are finding women in the form of scientists, in the form of researchers, engineers, doctors, and so on. But if you look at the past, you will find the number of women scientists are very less in number. They can be counted in fingers. So, therefore, their role as a possessor of knowledge or as a producer of knowledge, that is epistemic authority, has been denied to them because of the various social practices and social restrictions on them. Then the third is denigrating feminine cognitive style. Now, there are various feminist perspective, feminist way of seeing things, feminist way of gaining knowledge. If we deny those cognitive styles, then we are not able to build a comprehensive knowledge or a universal understanding of any phenomena. So, therefore, feminine cognitive style also needs to be incorporated. For example, the experiential knowledge of women or the lived experiences of women can contribute a lot towards understanding the position of women or their social and political disadvantages which are suffered by them. Then, producing theories of women that represent them as inferior or insignificant only in the ways in which they serve male interest. So, there have been many theories which are prevalent at the social level, at the economic level, which have for a considerable period of time have considered women. For example, some of the theories which were prevalent for a long time which considered women as biologically weak. Women were considered as physically weaker to men. So, these type of theories have projected women weaker, inferior and not to be suitable for certain jobs for a considerable period of time. And wherever they have been included, they were included only to serve male interest. So, this is also another form of exclusion or victimization or the neglect of women in the epistemological field. Then producing theories of social phenomena that render women's activities and interest or gendered power relations invisible. So, it is also related with the other point that such theories of social phenomena are produced which render women's activity or interest or gendered power relations invisible. For example, the contribution of women in the private sphere that is rendered completely invisible and that is considered as taken for granted as a naturalized function. Till now, we find that the contribution made by women in the domestic sphere is not recognized. Forget about the unpaid labor she is performing in the domestic sphere. Even her work is not recognized in the public sphere. If you remember that for a long time, if you see the admission form which used to be filled up for children at the school, the parents were supposed to mention only the father's name. The mother's name was never mentioned in the application form. So, that shows that is undermining the contribution made by a woman or as a mother in the upbringing of the child or in the education of that child. Though we know that woman is the first teacher of her child or a mother is the first teacher and the role she plays in upbringing of her child and making him or her educated is immense in nature. But still, this is only a small example. There are multifarious examples to illustrate that how the woman's contribution have been intentionally, consciously or you can say unconsciously, they have been made visible, they have been made invisible in the public sphere. Then producing knowledge that is not useful for people in subordinate position or that reinforces gender and other social hierarchies. So, various narratives, various theories have been put forward, some justified by the religious precepts, some justified by some social theories, some justified by some biological theories. They have justified the gender hierarchies in the society, and till now we find that such type of theories are prevalent which justify gender hierarchies. So, those also come under the traditional epistemology and how they perpetuate a knowledge, a form of knowledge which supports, which justifies gender hierarchies. So, they are also immensely harmful for the emancipation of women. Now, a very important thing is deconstructing the dislocated objectivity and rationality. We have already seen when we have studied the multiple theories belonging to critical traditions, we have already discussed and analyzed and to an extent criticized the objectivity and rationality which has been stressed upon by the Enlightenment tradition, and how that has actually neglected various forms of diversities that could not take into account various forms of exploitation and injustices in the society. In the traditional epistemology especially, language is the language of dualism and bivalence. Everything is seen in terms of binaries like rational, irrational, men, women, necessary contingent, core, peripheral, and they all have been talked about and discussed in the master slave mindset. So, the master is supposed to be rational, a slave is considered to be rational. Men are considered to be rational, women are considered to be emotional. For a long period of time, women were considered to be unsuitable to participate in politics because they were considered to be irrational. So, we have invented these binaries, and these binaries also help in perpetuating the hierarchies or the distinctions which are already inexistent in the society. Then feminists ask us to accept that all knowledge is situated knowledge, reflecting the position of the knowledge producer at a certain historical moment in a given material and cultural context. So, knowledge is not that objective and rational as it has been highlighted by the Enlightenment tradition or the liberal thinkers, but knowledge is a situated knowledge. Every knowledge is acquired keeping in mind the background or the social economic context in which that has actually produced that knowledge. So, we have to understand, and also we have to take into account the position of the knowledge producer, from where he is coming and what is his social and economic background, his knowledge. Everything has to be taken into account before we consider that what type of knowledge is produced, because we know that the knowledge producer is not that objective as it has been portrayed by the traditional epistemology, or the science projects knowledge producer as objective, but a knowledge producer is not that objective, even a scientist is not that objective as it is actually portrayed by the scientific community. Further, rationality becomes a tough, rigorous, impersonal, competitive, unemotional, objectifying stance and becomes inextricably intertwined with issues of men's gender identity. So, you can see all these adjectives which are used with the word rationality, they have been criticized, they have provided the basis for the feminist criticism, and they argue that besides being impersonal, promoting competition and neglecting the role of emotion, then objectification and all these things have completely intertwined with the issues of men's gender identity. So, therefore, what is considered as rational may be shaded or may be guided or may be embedded with men's identity. So, therefore, we have to understand that we have to reinterpret the meaning of objectivity and rationality when we are studying feminist epistemology. Now, evidence from many areas, most notably biology, anthropology and sociology, is often used to reinforce the stereotype of male as active, rational, superior and female as passive, emotional and inferior. So, this is a very common understanding or common differentiation made between men and women, or the particular stereotypes which we associate with men and women, that male are active, women are passive, male are rational, women are emotional, men are superior and women are inferior, and so on. Jagger has taken a critical view of the same and elaborately explores this association and the intersection of emotions, female, male and the role of ideological myth. And I would like to quote, "Far from precluding the possibility of reliable knowledge, emotion as well as value must be shown as necessary to such knowledge. The ideal of dispassionate inquiry is an impossible dream, but a dream nonetheless, or perhaps a myth that has exerted enormous influence on Western epistemology. Like all myths, it is a form of ideology that fulfills certain political and social function." Very, very important statement. Here the stress is on dispassionate inquiry, and this emphasis on the dispassionate inquiry is argued upon as impossible, and this has been considered very important and very seriously by the Western epistemology, and it has almost turned into an ideology. And dispassionate inquiry can never be possible. You cannot actually dissociate yourself from your social values, from your particular background, and therefore emotion and values must also be included yet to be better able to grasp the entire understanding of any situation. Feminist critique also addresses the ostensibly non-involved stance as the male epistemological stance that does not comprehend. Now, this non-involved stance is not that neutral and objective as it is often identified or agreed upon, but it reflects a bias or a gender bias, and it does not include the perspective of women. This worldview is specifically male and tends to exclude or devalue the experiences and points of view of women. These critics aim to uncover and suppose objectivity of classical notions of what constitute knowledge and try to advance the inclusion of women's experiences, stories, voices and phenomenologies. What is phenomenology? Phenomenology is a branch of philosophy that focuses on studying and understanding human experiences, including how we perceive, interpret and make sense of the world around us. So, the basic crux of this is that we have to take into account the experiences of women, we have to take into account or the lived experiences when we are trying to constitute knowledge, because objective knowledge is not possible. And how we can take into account the lived experiences? By including the women's stories, voices, then phenomenology, which is nothing but their experiences, and therefore we can actually make our epistemology more comprehensive and universal in nature. To broaden our perspective and to get towards a more inclusivist, appropriate approximation of truth. So, that is what I have been stressing upon, that if you want to really want to approach closer to the truth, we want to have a much more broader and comprehensive perspective, then we have to include these perspectives as the sources of knowledge, and we have to include the feminist perspective in order to make our knowledge truly universal in the real sense of the term. So, at the end there is need for reconstruction. Haraway reconceptualizes the idea of objectivity as situated or positioned knowledge. To her, feminist objectivity means quite simply situated knowledge. So, we cannot detach the feminist knowledge or epistemology from her experiences, and the experiences of women are different across the world. Differences of experiences can be witnessed even within a community. So, we have to take into account the situated knowledge, how the particular social economic conditions in which a woman is situated helps in perpetuation of a certain practice and certain behavioral norms towards women, and her experiences will contribute to knowledge. The universal knower in the classical sense assumes to have a God's eye, vision of reality, detached from all subjectivities and passions, and hence tends to engage in giving away universal prescriptions too. So, you see that there are two things which are mentioned. First is that the universal knower is having a God's eye and he is detached. So, a researcher or an inquirer is supposed to have a detached worldview. He is sitting at a distance from the society, watching everything from a distance, or you can say an unembedded form of making inquiry. So, this is not possible, because if you are sitting at a distance, then you will be making prescriptions which are universally applicable and which is having no connection with the reality, whereas you cannot, with this approach, you cannot understand the woman's experiences. Lauren Code argues that traditional epistemologies are the artifacts of a small privileged group of educated, usually prosperous white men, group that has the power, security and prestige to believe that it can generalize its experiences and normative ideals across the social order, thus producing a group of like-minded practitioners, and dismissing others as deviant, aberrant, they. So, I think this beautifully summarizes the feminist critique of traditional epistemology, that who are the producer of knowledge? They are the small group of privileged white men, and since they possess the power, access to resources and all the other security, they are able to impose these experiences to be universal experience, they impose their practices to be the universal practices across the world, thus producing a like-minded practitioners which they say are we, and the other who are on the opposite side, they are considered as not normal or deviant or aberrant, and they are considered as they. So, again a binary is created between the we and the they, men and the woman, master and the slave, then capitalist and the proletariat, man and the nature. So many these type of barriers or binaries are created, and they also create exclusion. Sandra Harding surveys three types of feminist epistemological strategies. They are feminist empiricism, feminist standpoint theory, and feminist postmodernism. So, maybe in some other lecture we will go into the depth of each type of strategies. Feminist epistemology, through its critique of traditional epistemologies, have helped refute the unfounded claims about women's nature and essence, which are often found to be ascriptions of culture. So, they have criticized how women have been projected, and the picturization of women's nature and essence which has been done in the traditional epistemology has been criticized. They have tried to unveil and identify the deep rooted androcentric bias in concepts, methods and theories, and have pointed out the practical implications of these biases which obstruct women's full participation in social, economic and political life. So, deep androcentric biases is reflected in concepts, methods and theories. So, these three things reflect an androcentric biases, and therefore, they have practical implications in the social, economic and political lives also. So, you can see the relationship. Then feminist epistemologies are quest to make more inclusive, comprehensive on more exhaustive spaces of knowledge formation, where the voices of the marginalized are also taken into account. So, this is the purpose of the feminist critique of the traditional epistemology, because they want to broaden it, they want to make it more inclusive. So, at the end of this lecture, there are certain activity questions which are based on what we have understood in today's lecture, like in what ways do gender biases manifest in the denial of women's epistemic authority? How are feminine cognitive styles typically devalued in knowledge production? What strategies can be employed to promote more equitable and inclusive representation of women in knowledge production? What role do feminist perspectives play in challenging traditional knowledge paradigms? With this, I come to the end of this lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.